Hello, lovelies. You're listening to episode 60 of the Broken Enchantments podcast, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. That's me. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Be sure to check out my Patreon for next week's episode, now available. You can check out the links below. Happy listening. You two, wait. When you hear a commotion from the front, make a dash for it. Get inside that room and deal with the chalice, Velasquez ordered. Janir and Carlisle panted their acknowledgement as Velasquez disappeared around the corner of a building. Janir leaned against the wall, drawing deep breaths and trying to think of her task instead of how cold and sore she was. So, what's the plan? Carlisle asked. How do you mean? To get in the window. Oh, well, there's a ward placed around it, so I'll have to go first. If you can give me a boost, I can get in and pull you after me. How much do you weigh? Janir glared at him. I'm just wondering if I'll be able to give you a boost. I don't need a lot, just a few inches once I have a hold on the sill. Oh, all right. If you say so. Carlisle shrugged. The moments ticked by as the sounds of battle came from the other side of Valmacan. A second later, Janir heard the unmistakable zing of an arrow followed by the thud of a collapsing body. Shouts of alarm rose from the Slavish soldiers stationed at the mansion's entrance. It would seem that those men weren't spelled. Come on. Janir led the way across the stretch of snow-covered ground between them and the window. By the time they reached the wall, the Slavish were shouting, and some of them were charging off into the city to find their harasser. Janir gulped a few quick breaths before she shed Velasquez's cloak, jumped, and dug her fingers into the window ledge. Carlisle, Janir grunted. I could use that boost now. Carlisle grabbed her feet and shoved as hard as he could. He wasn't nearly as strong as Velasquez, and it took a good deal more effort on her part, but between the enchanter and herself, she managed to drag her body over the windowsill. Her wrists had stopped bleeding, but started again as they scraped over the stonework. Biting back a whimper, Janir stiffly let down a hand for Carlisle. He was skinny enough that even she could lug him over the ledge. They stood there a moment, letting Janir recover. When she had her bearings, Janir felt out the way ahead, sensing Zamarza's golden aura along with the chalice's blazing inferno. Onward! Carlisle cheerfully whispered, stepping into the lead. On second thought, he drew to an abrupt stop. You lead. I don't know where we're going. Janir took the point, guiding him around the corner and down the hall. Jumping, she grabbed Carlisle's arm and jerked him into a side corridor before they reached the door. What? He whispered. There are 4 Argetallam honor guards outside, Janir explained. We need to get past them. Carlisle blinked at her. You didn't even see them. No, but I just know, all right? The enchanter took her claim rather well. He spread his palms. I'm support on this mission. Janir tried to think. Even on a good day, she couldn't take Morton's head on, much less in this battered state. Ruin she had only killed because she had got him by surprise. I have it. Why don't we repeat history? Like you did with those Highland bandits. Do you remember? Carlisle had asked the question innocently, but it sent a pang of guilt through her. Oh, right. Carlisle shifted uneasily. Sorry about that, but, well, I distract them and you get in there. Janir wasn't going to put Carlisle in such direct danger, especially when there was no chance she would be able to protect him. Carlisle, if they caught you, Without waiting, Carlisle darted out from the shelter of the corridor and into the hallway. Janir let off a hiss and tried to stop him, but he skirted out of her reach. She was left to silently curse him for his brashness. She heard him pace a few steps backwards down the hall. A moment later, "Hey, hey!" Carlisle's voice rang through the hallway like the bellowing of a temple bell. Janir heard the guards start. An instant later, a carcatan sailed down the hallway, past the corridor where Janir hid. It struck with a thud. A few seconds later, after it must have struck the ground, Janir saw it flying back the way it had come, doubtless to its owner's waiting hand. "Ha-ha! Missed me! Missed me!" Carlisle jeered. "Intruder!" the guards cried. "The walls have been breached." Carlisle fled down the corridor, 3 more tawns on his trail as a trumpet blared, summoning more. Janir stepped out of her hiding place just as they passed out of view. The remaining guard on duty tensed at the sight of her. Bloodied and beaten, she could only hope he assumed she had been fighting. She had mere moments until the reinforcements arrived. They could already be heard clanking down the corridor. "The Lord Argetallam has sent me to see that the chalice is safe," Janir lied, voice trembling. "I have orders not to let anyone inside." The guard faced her critically. "State your name, rank, and commanding officer. Where are your carcatan?" Janir glanced over her shoulder. If she could get around to the outside and find the windows. The Morton noticed her longing gaze toward the corridor. His sharp appraisal flickered over her bloodied wrists. "You're not going anywhere until I get an explanation. Come here." Gulping, Janir compliantly drew closer. She didn't have any choice but to obey. The Morton held his carcatan at the ready and studied her like a piece of meat. At the last second, she feinted to one side and slipped around behind him. But in an instant, he had whirled around and was facing her again, his hand around her arm. The Morton stabbed for her. She twisted sideways, but his carcatan nicked her hip. It was all she could do not to scream. Janir didn't know where Carlisle was or what he was doing. Shouts rang down the corridor as the guard's reinforcements stopped behind the bend. The guard pinned her against the wall and slammed one shoulder against her left arm. The Morton rammed one of his rods into her other arm, sending the now familiar jolts coursing through her veins. Snapping her jaw shut to keep the scream inside, Janir twisted her arm from under his weight. Moving as fast as a desert snake, she grabbed his ear, as much of it as she could get in her hand, and she yanked. Her eyes were watering with the carcatan's burn, and the rod's shrieks drowned out all other sound, but Janir was sure she got a reaction. The Morton pulled his carcatan off her arm and drove it into her side, jabbing as hard as he could while she kept tearing on the tender flesh of his ear. Her whole body shook and screamed with the unbearable touch of the carcatan. If she weren't an Argetallam, it would have killed her. Where was Carlisle? Suddenly, there was a thunk, and the Morton released Janir. Unsteady, he whirled around, lunging out behind him. Janir's tearing eyes came into focus enough to see Carlisle with a wrought iron candle stand. Trying to function through the lingering pain that the carcatan left behind, Janir dove for the Argetallam before he could make another pass for Carlisle. The Morton drove a carcatan into her stomach, just below her sternum, before she could get him. Gasping, Janir strained to keep her mind under control. Out of the corner of her eye, Janir saw Carlisle raise the candle stand again and bring it down. It made a sickening crunch on the back of the Morton's skull, and he fell to the floor, red leaking through his crumpled helmet. Janir took a step around the body, making a conscious effort not to look at it, suffocating under her urge to scream. Carlisle grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door the Argetallams had been guarding. Reinforcements appeared around the corner up ahead, weapons drawn and waiting to taste blood, closing in. Janir and Carlisle raced as fast as they could, Carlisle shouting and begging and ordering Janir to keep herself together and move faster. How they made it inside the Chalice's chamber, ahead of the Slavish soldiers, Janir never knew. Carlisle shoved Janir inside ahead of him, slamming the doors and cramming the candle stand through the handles. The moment Janir staggered through the door, a green web whooshed from the dais. Janir hardly had time to bring her arms over her face before they collided, and it crumbled away, dissipating like steam. Standing beside the chalice was the woman in red, Zamarza, along with her hideous little pet, Cribs. They were the only others in the room. "My dear, you look like something washed ashore after a shipwreck." Zamarza tossed her hair over her shoulder. "Get out." Janir separated each word ever so clearly. She couldn't deal with the woman right now. "Or what?" Janir stood her ground. "I am an Argetallam. You are an enchantress. I think you know what." With Seovan and thousands of others at stake, she just might try purging a gifted woman, as Cerilius and Canicade had said. Zamarza gulped. For all her power, she was defenseless against Janir. Heartbeats later, both she and Cribs evaporated, disappearing to who knew where. What choice did the woman have? "Janir!" There was an unmistakable edge of urgency in Carl's voice. He was holding onto the candle stand he had wedged through the door handles, but the entire door frame shuddered. Without a word, Janir staggered to the chalice atop the dais, orange light like a taunting beacon. Every step strained 100 different injuries, but Janir kept putting one foot in front of the other. Blood, both hers and Nott, stained her skin. Her sores from the carcatan oozed. Her body demanded that she stop and rest. At the bottom step, Janir stumbled and fell. Her lips split open again on the step. "Come on, Janir," Carl cried. "Move! We're counting on you." Shoving herself onto her hands, Janir stumbled up the dais, fighting, praying, willing herself onwards. "Janir, you have 20 seconds at best," Carl yelled. Janir reached the top step and fell to her knees. The Chalice of Malvron sat in front of her, surrounded by its delicate weave of copper wires. Janir could try ripping those out, but she wasn't sure it would work, and she didn't have enough time. "Janir, 10 seconds, come on!" Carl shrieked. The door frame was weakening. Any moment now, it would collapse. Hastily drawing a breath, Janir spread her hands and firmly wrapped them around the chalice, over the wires. The power bottled up inside the chalice was massive, and as soon as she touched it, Janir could feel it pressing against her presence, challenging, testing. All the brimstone and bloodlust of Malvron swirled around her, seeking a conflict. She planned to give it one. The chalice's power fought back against her presence, biting and stinging. Janir's face scrunched as she refused to withdraw. She steeled herself and kept pushing at the untamed magic, slamming the force of her own powers against it. The chalice retaliated, sending jolts of burning sensations through her body. Tears of pain slid from under her closed eyes as the chalice battered against her presence, but Janir pressed harder, driving her own magic against it. The whirling mass of enchantment inside the chalice began to writhe and scream beneath the weight of her Argetallam's power. Janir refused to relent even as the bloodlust and fury seemed to tear into her very soul. Focusing for one final effort, Janir rammed her entire consciousness, along with the ethereal element that was her magic, against the chalice as hard as she could. Sparks and embers flashed around her, and the enchantments began to toss and pitch like a dying animal. Janir refused to let up, keeping the power fighting for its existence until... crack! Janir wasn't sure what it was, but something had broken. She hesitantly opened her eyes to see a dark vein shoot down the chalice's stem. Soon, another crack slivered the chalice, and another. The chalice shook, but Janir didn't dare let go of it, not yet. Then the orange light from the chalice increased. It lit up the entire room in a blinding brilliance that Janir couldn't escape even with her eyes squeezed shut. Thousands of voices cried out in shock and fear. They were so far away, and yet she could hear them in the chalice's depths. The connection between the chalice and the spelled soldiers. The voices overlapped and clamored together. She caught snatches of curses, obscenities, angry oaths, prayers, names of loved ones, pleas for mercy. The men she was killing by severing the enchantment. And then the glow died, and the chalice was just an old cup with mere hints of power to show that it had ever been anything special at all. Janir gasped, breathing as deeply as she could in her strained and tender body. There was a sharp ringing in her ears, and black splotches went over everything. Everything was suddenly dark without the chalice's light. She didn't hear Carlisle or the Slavish soldiers. It was as if she was alone in an empty world. Janir turned her head, but the darkness in her vision obscured whatever might be at her back. She tried to stand, but her body failed her, and she collapsed to the ground. Straining, Janir tried to lift herself off the floor. Banging on the doors warned that they didn't have much time. Clamoring voices promised no mercy. "You did it, Janir," Carlisle gasped. "Come on, we have to get out of here." Slinging her arm over his shoulders, they limped to a narrow window framed in alabaster. Carlisle kicked at the thin stone, and it cracked like eggshell. The cleft was barely wide enough for Janir to squeeze through. The broken bits of the window cut her arms and snagged her tunic. Something ripped, but she forced herself onward. On the other side, she plummeted straight to the ground, losing her balance. "Janir!" Carlisle was close on her heels, landing with surprising grace by her head. "Are you all right?" He tugged her out of the snow. There was not a part of her that didn't hurt, but she had no time for rest. "Seovan!" Janir clawed onto her hands and knees. "What?" "I have to get to Seovan." A great cry rose up from inside the chalice's chamber as the guards realized what had happened. A spear flew out of the window, sailing over their heads. "Janir!" Carlisle dashed after her. Keeping low, she ran. If Amila or Canistrith got to him first. "Do you know where he is?" Carlisle sprinted beside her, robe flapping. Janir didn't know how she found the strength, but she charged back to the mansion on the hill. Argetallams were pouring out, heading straight for the battlefield. Somewhere out of sight, the clamor of battle raged. "Slow down!" Carlisle grabbed her arm, clenching the sores from her beatings. "There are hundreds of Argetallams in there. You'll be caught." "I can't leave him," Janir panted. "I can't." Carlisle rolled his eyes. "You don't actually think I want to leave him. Listen, we need to go around the back, where we won't be walking straight into trouble. All right?" Taking a shaky breath, Janir nodded. There are some windows around the south side, and if I can get there..." "Sounds great. Lead the way, but watch your head, okay?"
You have been listening to Broken Enchantments, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of patrons-only freebies. You can learn more at elizabethwheatley.com. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. I'll see you next time.